Welcome to Back to the Decade. I'm Thomas Adams, joined by Nick Hoffman. Nick, what's up?
What's up?
So we're recording here. Today's June 11th, 2020. We normally start our podcast by being a little loose and fun and just kind of shooting the shit. But since the time of our last recording, there's been some unfortunate events in Minneapolis revolving the murder of George Floyd and the aggressive Black Lives Matter movement that's preceded it. And in light of those events...
Emphasize murder of George Floyd.
Emphasize murder, correct.
Yeah.
In light of those events, we were looking at our slate this month and looking back at June 2010, there was, some movies we want to talk about. We wanted to talk about the NBA Finals, and we... I think we might still have time to talk about those things, but we really wanted to emphasize the importance of the events that are happening in our country right now and use our platform to talk about said events and still hit on the fact that, our goal is to talk about things from 10 years ago. And this stuff was as relevant 10 years ago as it is now. This isn't a new thing. So we found a docuseries that aired on Spike in 2017, and it's called Time, the Kalief Browder Story. And Kalief Browder is someone that I wasn't familiar with before I found this docuseries. And the reason I thought this docuseries was important because the incidents surrounding his case happened in 2010, 10 years and 1 month ago. And we kind of like to go back and be nostalgic about things that we liked and things that we had fun with or enjoyed from back then. This is a little bit more of a heavy topic, but it's worth discussion. This is a 6-part series. It's on Netflix right now. We both found it very informative and harrowing, and I think we would both recommend watching it, especially as you're trying to make sense of everything going on in the world right now. With that, we're going to start talking about this series, what we took away from it and what we learned. Nick, why don't you get us started with your thoughts on this series?
Yeah, man. Yeah, let's go back to the decade.
Mm-hmm.
Not my favorite rewind, but we got to talk about it because it's really truly the most important thing happening in the world today. There's a lot of names that can be said over just the last 6, 7, 8 years. And today we're going to focus on Kalief Browder, he was a young African-American kid. And at the age of 17, he was sent to Rikers Island, one of the most horrific, just awful prisons. I wouldn't even say the country. After watching the documentary, I would say the world. And he was sent there for 3 years for allegedly stealing a backpack. And for 2 of those years, he spent in solitary confinement. Most people are familiar with solitary confinement, but you're basically thrown into a very small cell, locked up, and you are given 3 meals a day, and you're in there alone for, basically 24/7, and they didn't seem to be letting him out a whole lot. So typically, one thing they brought up in the documentary, they had a guy from the Army there saying that it usually takes around 15 days for you to start to crack under solitary confinement. 15 days. And Kalief Browder spent 2 years collectively. So he went to court numerous times, never got a trial. The judges, prosecution, they kept pushing the trial back because the people not ready. They claimed they knew where the victim was, and they were going to, quote unquote, fly him up to the Bronx to take part in the trial. Yeah, it turns out they never had any intention of doing that, and basically just continued to push the case because they didn't want to deal with it. So a good, I guess the first 3 or 4 parts of the series really focus on Kalief's experience in the prison and how he was basically bullied from day one. I mean, the kid didn't really have a chance. I mean, again, he's a juvenile. He's 17 years old, and he's been put into this hellhole that he doesn't deserve. It all happens because someone racially profiled him and his friend. That person worked at a restaurant. They got jumped in an alley. Their backpack was stolen. I think, was it 2 weeks later, he sees Kalief and his buddy, and he says, "Those guys, they were it. They stole my backpack. Tell a cop." Cops take him in. Parents can't afford bail, or the mom can't afford bail anyway.
Well, on that note of bail, before you continue too much further,
Go ahead, man.
The thing that struck me so heavily, and it's relevant today, as you know, we're seeing things on our ballots about the cash bail system and how the cash bail system is designed to keep the poor imprisoned.
It's ridiculous.
And allow the wealthy to walk free when they are convicted of crimes. And Kalief Browder's bail was set at $3,000. $3,000 for stealing a backpack that contained $700 in cash.
That he wasn't even...
That
there was no evidence that he did it.
That he took it. And when when you're growing up and you're told the phrase, "Don't do the crime if you can't do the time," and something about that just didn't add up in this case. And I'll let you continue, but like that was made clear in the first 15 minutes of this whole series. The bail they wanted on him relative to the crime, it didn't add up. It doesn't add up.
And the worst part about that too was the mother, with help, comes up with the money. And when they go to pay his bail, they said, "Oh no, you know what? The system's saying that they can't release him because he violated his probation for, again, a crime that he had not yet been found guilty for." Yeah, I mean, the whole thing's infuriating throughout. And the saddest part is, and we'll bring this up more later, but this was and is happening to so many other people in the Black community in the Bronx and across the country. Mm-hmm. And because Kalief Browder was this incredibly strong individual who was able to endure all this for 3 years, and it's why we're talking about it today, because he was what he went through and he was able to mentally conquer is just astounding. Anyway, so he finally, so I'm sorry, I lost track a little bit there, but a lot of the documentary focuses on his experience in the prison, where he's, again, bullied from the very start. He's beat up. He's forced to try and choose sides, but no side was willing to cooperate with him in prison because, again, he's a child. And
he just flat out didn't want to live in the gang culture that's created at these prisons.
And this kid was tough, man. God, he was tough. It was amazing. He kept getting moved from cell block to cell block, or whatever they called them, levels. There were different levels in Rikers. And finally, because he kept being the fighter that he was, and he keeps getting moved, the officers just decide, we're just going to lock this kid up in solitary confinement, even though most every incident that he was in was never caused by him. It was just him getting the shit beat out of him. So, yeah.
Or he would react to being coerced, or, something to that effect, where, somebody would push him and then he would punch them in the face. And
yeah, I mean,
things that the big thing to take away from his story and the justice system and how it's designed for cases like this is that if he was willing to just admit, "I'm guilty," if he was willing to say, "I did it," they would have let him walk free, because that the system is set up that way. They just need confirmation of the crime, get it off their books, not have to worry about trials, and let him just be a convict out in the world, whatever. But he didn't do it. He didn't do it, and he wasn't willing to lie and say that he did. And because of that, they kept him there. Because he was unwilling to admit to a crime he didn't commit, they kept him in prison, awaiting retrial after retrial, never coming until it takes 3 years for him to eventually be set free.
Yeah, and they set him free because after he's denied pleas and had told them, no, I'm not going to admit to guilt when I'm not guilty. I mean, I think it was at least a couple dozen times that he went through that. They finally dropped the case because they never had one. So they held this kid, Rikers Island, for 3 years when they knew they didn't have a case, and they just held him there, just waiting for him to crack. And he didn't. And I think that alone, him taking that stance and keeping that strength and never faltering on his innocence is nothing short of a miracle, man. I mean, again, he's truly a hero.
It's inspirational for sure. And the tragedy of the situation is that, that notion of him being a hero is what I think will tragically results in his suicide, which is the tragic conclusion of this story, is that the weight of everything he went through after leaving prison was too much. So he killed himself. This is not a story like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Trayvon Martin or Philando Castile or Breonna Taylor or any one of these cases in recent memory that resulted in a black child murdered at the hands of some form of law enforcement, whether it be a citizen attempting a citizen's arrest or a white cop that found it necessary to leave their knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This is not one of those cases. There's plenty of those cases. This case is a child that was so terribly abused physically and mentally by the justice system that is set up for our citizens and our people of this country, that he killed himself. He was so mentally abused by what he suffered and by the insistence of the state to get him to admit to something he didn't do. The insistence of the state to deflect any blame off of themselves, which, as we're seeing now, our leadership, our government, nothing but resistance to take responsibility and admit wrongdoing in cases of racial injustice. He went through that and was continually called a liar, continually said, you say these things happen, but I don't believe you. Continually called, even after the fact, even after he was set free.
The police were still targeting him. They still had, there were lawyers saying that, like, oh, well, he got arrested again. So, like, maybe he did steal that backpack. And just like the dude helping him out, he's like, what? That's not even relevant, man.
And he was continually hounded and simultaneously put in the spotlight in front of the world, whether it be on CNN or The View, or being sought out for this documentary series, because plenty of it includes his own testimony before he killed himself, because this wasn't going to be a documentary about a child that killed himself. It was going to be a documentary about a kid that suffered a severe injustice. And it just so happened that during the process, he committed suicide. But he's got Jay-Z reaching out to him. He's got Rosie O'Donnell. He's got all kinds of major figures that want him to be this face for a movement, this face for reform. And he's just a kid that's suffered nothing but physical and mental abuse. And he crippled under the weight of that. And it's terrible. It's terrible that we allow these things to happen. And even worse, that people like you and me who do our best to stay relatively informed, we don't hear about it. It doesn't make the news because there wasn't giant protests that formed as a result. Or maybe there wasn't, and we just forgot. And that's
on
us.
I think there was. It wasn't as big as what's happening with George Floyd's murder, obviously, but I think after he killed himself, there was quite a bit of peaceful protests that were just asking again to fix our broken justice system. And, sadly, I didn't really know much about this story. I knew his name. I had heard his name. But I didn't know much about the story until watching this documentary. And I wasn't paying enough attention at the time. And personally, I don't think I've paid enough attention. I haven't paid enough attention this whole time. I've always believed Black Lives Matter. I've always been on that side of good. But I'm really starting to realize that obviously just believing isn't enough. I grew up in a community. I grew up in Fayetteville, Georgia. So I had a lot of Black friends, and I was around a lot of Black people in my community. And I always just assumed that, everything was okay, or at least, the very least, things were continually getting better with race relations and everything. But, I've realized that, especially in the last few years, that that just isn't enough. And it's not the case, too, because it hasn't gotten better. We need to do better in having conversations on racism and social injustice, and reading literature. And if you can protest, you get out there and protest. And if you can donate, you donate to the many wonderful foundations that are out there standing and fighting for this cause. I know for you and me, it's hard we both have 2 little girls on the way, and we also happen to be in pandemic right now, which sucks. Because I would love to be out there protesting right now, man. I would love to be in there with those crowds. But,
So I'll share a story. I actually did attend one myself. I went last week to a protest in Midtown Atlanta, and it was a sobering experience. This isn't something that I've done previously, and that's on me. But everything that's happened, it's meant a lot to me. It's made me angry, and I think more than anything, and this is something that I want to hit on, because in all the online discourse and all of the hate on social media from different sides of the political line, the people that want to make this a political issue, this isn't a political issue. This is a humanitarian issue about right and wrong. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. And for the people I've seen in videos shared on my social media walls, people that say, "Oh, they're making George Floyd out to be a martyr," or why do white people suddenly feel a need to apologize? Why are white people, they suddenly feel the need, these are good white people, why do they feel the need to go out there and protest when they didn't do anything wrong? This isn't about me doing anything wrong. I've, like you, tried to live my life treating other people the way I want to be treated, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of political belief or religion or anything like that. I'm not looking for forgiveness. I went out and marched because these people need to be seen and they need to be heard. And for too long, we've said, that's terrible, but it doesn't affect me in an immediate enough way that I'm willing to go out of my way to do something about it. And that's the problem. The problem is that we say, well, I'm not like that. I don't treat people that way. I don't discriminate on race.
Mm-hmm.
And we ignore it. And we say, oh, well, it's awful. I wish people wouldn't do that, but I'm doing the best I can. The best you can isn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
We've reached a point where we need to be better to each other, and we need to not make this about politics. Because the people that want to call George Floyd a martyr, you don't understand what that word means. That's someone that dies fighting for a cause. George Floyd didn't die fighting for the cause. The cause happened because George Floyd died. And I don't care who he was. I don't care if he was a saint or if he was a convicted criminal. The man didn't deserve to die. And that is why this fight rages on. And I don't know if our tiny platform that we have will go very far in conveying that message, but that is why this is happening, and that is why this is important. So
yeah,
the march I went to was extremely peaceful. It was very well organized. You spoke of our impending parenthood, and I've thought a lot about that in the past couple of weeks, and the world that I'm bringing a child into. And it's messed up, and it weighs on me to think that she's going to have to enter a world with so much hate and discourse. But when I marched on Saturday and I looked on the sides and I saw children on their parents' shoulders holding signs,
yeah.
I saw parents pointing to the crowd, pointing to the protest and explaining to their children, this is what's happening and this is why it's happening. That gave me hope, because that's our duty now. Our duty is to explain to our children, the world isn't perfect, but we can make it better. And I got chills on Saturday walking across a bridge and seeing the vehicles out there honking their horns with their fists in the air, standing in solidarity, supporting this cause, because that means we're moving forward. And when it concluded, they asked us to take a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and sit in silence. And we were in the dirt, just a mound of dirt. And we took a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I'll tell you, it hurts. It hurts to sit on your knee for that long. You put your body into an uncomfortable position. And when you think about that police officer had to put himself into that position, putting skin against skin, bone against bone, and he sat there making himself physically uncomfortable for that long to harm this man and to detain this man and put him down like an animal. It's a really sobering experience. And that's my experience with going to that protest last week. And I just wanted to share that with you having brought that up.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I obviously, Kat and I would both be in the thick of things protesting if we could, but just with
it's dangerous right now.
Pandemic still going on. But this is my way of protesting, and Kat, she works for the CDC and she's doing amazing things, and she always does. And I mean, her view on all this is, I'm very much an extension of her in a lot of ways, because since I've been with her, she's taught me a lot of things about these types of movements, to where I was more of a naive, white privileged guy. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm not racist. I have black friends. I grew up with black people. Like, I've never felt this way. And like what you were saying, I mean, it's so true, because that's not enough. You have to see the bigger picture. And and since being with her, because she's much smarter than I am, and her eyes are much more open to the world. She's helped me along the way, like realize, like, yeah, you know what, you're right. And then seeing in the last couple of years these murders that we see, and I've become more and more increasingly angry, and mixed in with our current administration, it's nice to have this platform and to be able to at least get my voice out, and I can at least protest in this way, and have the conversation, because it's really important. And it doesn't matter if it's happening between you and a buddy, at your house or on the back deck, and you're just chilling. Having the conversation is truly important, and just really understanding like what the Black community is truly going through, and how broken our justice system really is. And I know you mentioned not necessarily wanting to make things political, but I do want to hone in on the way our administration has reacted to all of this in the last couple of weeks, and sort of just ask, where the hell is the leadership? I mean, there's so many people that haven't been listened to and haven't been heard. I have zero problem with the way things, because I hear people all the time, they're like, well, look at all the rioting, look at all the looting. And I'm like, well, you know what, man? Those people have been shouting from the rooftops for years, and no one's listening. So how do you expect them to act? So that's just part of it, man. That's part of it. And as MLK said, it's the language of the unheard. And it's just, that's what's going to happen when you have a group of people that are being disrespected, that aren't being treated fairly, and that aren't being given justice.
It's a small piece of it. And I think that none of us want property destroyed. I would never condone setting fire to a building, or these are things that you wouldn't do, but they're so minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And
property is not life. And even though I would say personally, I would never be involved in a riot, I would never loot, I would never condone that behavior, who the hell am I to condemn people? I'm not perfect. And
yes.
And it's a small piece of it, and it's taking away from the greater message. When you make the message about the rioting and the looting, you're taking away from the bigger message. And people would say, well, that's on them. If you want the message to be focused, then don't riot and don't loot. But these people are not activists. They're human beings. They're human beings acting in maybe not a great way. But like you said, language of the unheard, it's a powerful quote, because everyone wants to reference Martin Luther King and talk about why don't they protest like Martin Luther King? Why don't they march like they did on Selma? But before I let you continue with the political tangent, you mentioned your upbringing, and my upbringing was very different. I grew up in a suburban town in Central Florida. I went to school with no diversity. I attended middle schools and high schools, no black people, none. You would be hard-pressed to find 5. That's how scarce it was. And we had a graduating class of about 2,700. It was big. But the diversity was next to none. And it's just part of the neighborhood that I grew up in. But all that being said, I've thought a lot about the public school system and the things that we're taught when we grow up. And there are so many things about race and the history of racial violence in this country that we're just not told. They don't teach it to us because it's unpleasant, because it would be taboo to talk about. And I'm having to learn about this stuff at 27. And that's a problem. It's a problem that we don't know, and we're not told growing up about the unpleasant side. We celebrate MLK Day every year. We get school off for it. I remember I was always excited to not have school. But the way that they explained to us what that meant was to show us a YouTube clip of his speech. A speech about I have a dream, and I couldn't quote it offhand, but it's this speech that everyone knows, but I don't know if they ever understood the message. And that's what I'm learning now as I'm evolving into adulthood and reflecting on the things I was taught as a child. They don't cover the whole story, and that is why people are hesitant to believe that racism exists. It's wrong.
So, yeah, man, and to come back to what you just said, which is a great, point, and something I want to emphasize with going into our administration's response, because you said, and I completely agree, rioting, looting, it's such a minuscule part of the problem. It's so small. It's not even, it's hardly significant, man. And Trump, our president of the United States, he likes to use excuses like this that are very small, very minuscule, and turn it on the people doing good. So, I mean, I'm sure you saw his response in front of the White House when they had peaceful protest happening a couple Mondays ago. He comes out 30 minutes before curfew was set, which that was obviously calculated. He tear gasses peaceful protesters so he can have a clear pathway to a church. It's an Episcopal church. It's very famous for presidents going there when they've been inaugurated. Holding a Bible, using it and the church as a prop for a photo op to push his political agenda and to continue to just fuel the flames of a race war that's happening in our country right now. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but before, I think it was before or after, doesn't matter. He threatens the country and its citizens and rightful protesters with military action, calling himself a law and order president. Again, only spreading hate and just in no way helping the situation or having any sort of sympathy or understanding of what Black Lives Matter and the movement means. He just continues to
he's incapable of empathy. He's incapable of that response.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention this, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it just, all you have to do is watch the man or read his words on Twitter, which he that's the only place he seems to address the public in the country. What else do you need to see that that this guy is just, all he's doing is fueling hatred and fueling racism throughout the country? And I'm going to read too, because I don't know how many examples you need with this guy. With the people that try to give him excuse after excuse after excuse. But this is what he tweeted the day after there was protests in front of the White House. And I swear, you ever watch It's Always Sunny?
I've not.
well, there's a character, Charlie. He doesn't really know how to read or write very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I swear, like, Charlie wrote this thing. Great job last night at the White House by the U.S. Secret Service. They were not only totally professional, but very cool. I was inside, watched every move, and couldn't have felt more safe. They let the protesters, quote unquote, scream and rant as much as they wanted. But whenever someone got too frisky or out of line, they would quickly come down on them hard. Didn't know what hit them. The front line was replaced with fresh agents, like magic. Big crowd, professionally organized, but nobody came close to breaching the fence. If they had, they would have been greeted with the most vicious dogs and most ominous weapons I have ever seen. What? That's when people would have been really badly hurt, at least. This is our president of the United States, everyone. Many Secret Service agents just waiting for action. Quote, we put the young ones on the front line, sir. They love it. And good practice. End quote. As you saw last night, they were very cool and very professional. Never let it get out of hand. Thank you. On the bad side, the DC mayor, who was always looking for money and help, wouldn't let the DC police get involved. Not their job. Nice. The professionally managed,
he's talking to himself via Twitter.
The professionally managed so-called, quote, protesters, end quote, at the White House had little to do with the memory of George Floyd. They were just here to cause trouble. The Secret Service handled them easily. Tonight, I understand, and this is what's just, he ends it on truly just an unbelievable note, is MAGA night at the White House? Just welcoming his extreme followers to come and just, again, fueling the flames of a race war in the year 2020, our president. And I also would like to parallel that terrible, just awful response. And that's, I mean, people listening to this already know this, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg with that man. He's an awful leader, and hopefully he's out of the White House soon. But I want to also talk about what a good leader, how a good leader responds. And to circle back to the Kalief Browder story and talk about Barack Obama's response when he heard the story of Kalief, and it was after his suicide. You know what Obama did? He wrote a piece in the Washington Post on why we must rethink solitary confinement. And his administration took action with the issue, and they ended up reforming the federal prison system, which included banning solitary confinement for juveniles, and also as a response to low-level infractions, and expanding treatments for the mentally ill, and increasing the amount of time inmates can spend outside of their solitary confinement cells. And then even with George Floyd's death recently, he released a town hall, man. He's not even our president anymore. He came out, he released a town hall and talked about the importance of Black Lives Matter movement and just gave his wonderful advice as usual. So while our president sits back and says nothing except for what he types on Twitter, and pulls this kind of stunts he did a couple Mondays ago, and just, you know, hate-filled, dangerously violent speech that his speech rhetoric is just, it's unreal. And we're having to go through that at this time as well. And there's plenty of times where I wish it was 2010, because Barack Obama would still be our president. But yeah, man, I mean, the kind of things he says, that Trump says with stuff like this, and oftentimes leading to some insane conspiracy theories, are just the kinds of things just dumb, ignorant assholes can come up with. And it sickens me, man, that we don't have better leadership from our administration with all this. And that's about as political as you'll ever hear me get. And I don't know, but I think it's important to mention, and people should know that we need new leadership in this country if we're really going to tackle this problem from the top. You know what I mean? Because we have great leaders and great people fighting and leading marches across the country, and it's beautiful and it needs to keep going. And we can just now, we can just hope for better leadership from the top, from our government.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I have no objections. And honestly, if I were to get into it, I could be a lot meaner, and I'm sure you could too.
Yeah.
But I think back to that November night in 2016, and I think about how there was reports of people crying when they found out what the result was going to be and who was going to win the presidency. And people said, "Why are you crying? Liberal snowflakes, sore losers. What do you have to cry about? Blah, blah, blah." This is why. What's happening right now, what happened in the past 2, 3, 4 weeks, what happened back in March as our administration responded to a global pandemic that still terrorizes our world and our country and continues to grow as we seemingly ignore its existence.
Yeah, which they've stopped talking about. They claim victory that
we beat it, but yet people still are getting it in consistent numbers to what we've been seeing. This is why. This is why we cried, because we knew. And it's not a surprise. And that's what bothers me the most, is that we knew who he was and we elected him anyway. And the people that elected him don't care. They don't care. And it goes so much, it goes deeper than political policy. I'll be the first to admit I do not study political policy. Democrat, Republican, I don't pay much attention to it. It's not something that I spend time studying. I probably should do more about investigating policy and how to best influence local government, among other things.
Yeah, man, I'm right there with you.
But when I vote for president, I've voted. I felt positively about the leadership of Barack Obama, and in my voting history, I voted Democrat just because that's the way that it's leaned for me. But when I was younger, I think when I was 15, before I was voting age, I'm pretty positive that I liked Republican candidates. And there's been Republican candidates that I've liked, that I think have strong leadership. So this isn't about politics. When I vote, I am looking for someone that when the shit hits the fan, when the world seems lost and we need someone to turn to, who is going to offer help? Who is going to address the people and do their best to reassure them that everything's okay, even when they don't know? They don't know, because the president of the United States, despite what Donald John Trump thinks, is not almighty, does not make all the decisions for the nation. That's the point of democracy, is that we have a system in place that allows multiple leaders across multiple regions to make decisions for the people that live in said regions. And the president basically just has to keep it together, has to keep shit in line, and don't let it get out of control. And he does the opposite. I saw a great quote that is relevant now more than ever as our country ravages through a disease. But it said, don't focus on the symptoms and ignore the disease. These things that are happening, the riots and the looting and the protests, those are the symptoms. The culture that's been allowed to form from prejudice, from people seeking self-interest, people voting with their wallets, people voting with what best fits me and what I like and what I need. That's the disease. And that's why this happens.
He's literally, him and the administration are literally a plague. They are a pandemic. The pandemic that's currently happening is because of them. But that's another podcast.
And I will guarantee that if this man was just citizen of the United States, Donald Trump, living in his Florida resort or his New York skyscraper, penthouse, whatever it may be, if that's who he was right now, and Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, and this had happened, which it could have, and it probably would have, because I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton would have solved this. I'm not saying Hillary Clinton would have made this problem go away. Probably not. No. Most likely no. But if he was not president and she was, and this was happening, you could be damn sure that he would be condemning her and that he would be speaking to the people that are protesting, saying, I see you, I hear you, I want to help you, because that's who he is. Because he will act in his own self-interest. And if it means making people he doesn't like look bad, he'll do it.
Yeah, and I mean, her administration, too, like, would have, I mean, just so many more competent people around her making the right decisions.
On this issue, for sure.
Having the right responses. And no, even with the pandemic, too, man, like, they would have kept the pandemic response teams together. And before that, they would have kept the pandemic research teams together. The scientists, everyone that was involved with researching COVID-19 and any of the COVID viruses that have plagued our world for decades now would have still been in place. But again, that's another podcast. Let's not derail too much.
So
I think
we went a bit off topic. The Kalief Browder story is a tragic one, and it's, as a documentary, it's not the world's best documentary. I think it tells an incredibly compelling story. I think that as a piece of television, it was incredibly engaging, and I recommend people check it out because I think it's important, and I think it's a good piece of media to consume in light of everything that we are experiencing, to help people understand what we mean. And by we, I mean those that are out there on the streets chanting no justice, no peace. Those that are out there saying Black Lives Matter, because they're not saying that all lives don't matter. That's one of my favorites, is people that want to respond with all lives matter. That's not the argument. That's not the argument. Nobody's saying that all lives don't matter. And we could go on a whole thing about that. It's about a group of people that have been ignored and written off as one denomination of our culture and our society. And the story of Kalief Browder is a great representation of that. To anyone that wants to claim systemic racism is a myth and it only exists because we talk about it, if that's your viewpoint, I dare you to watch this 5 hours of film and say otherwise.
Yeah, one of the best examples I saw on the All Lives Matter argument was, hey, all lives matter. Well, yeah, man, but that's not the point here, okay? Because say a rainforest is on fire, right? And we got to save that rainforest. So save the rainforest. But then someone says, but wait, all rainforests matter. You're like, yeah, man, I understand that. But right now, this particular rainforest is in real trouble and they need help.
On
and we
fire.
need to save that rainforest. It's on fire, man. So, okay, you see what I'm saying? And then they're like, oh, never really thought about it that way. Well, okay, man, there you go.
Yeah, I've seen that meme floated around.
Fuck, man, like Black Lives Matter. Stop trying to find other words and things to degrade that or ignore that.
And if you refuse to say Black Lives Matter, you don't think they matter. That's the bottom line. But I think that we've gotten a lot of anger off our chest. Is there anything you want to say about the documentary specifically before we try to transition?
Yeah, I mean, you hit most of the points there in the end, but I think also it's amazing. And obviously encourage people to watch this documentary. It's actually the executive producer is Jay-Z. And he's interviewed throughout, and he's just an incredible entrepreneur and just a figure of our time. And this is a real passion project for him, and he had a lot to do with getting it out there. And and you touched on this before we started recording, but it's cool how it ends, because it ends really with, it's almost like the cameras are on right now in our world today in 2020, because it's police brutality, people that have died from police brutality, and it's movements, it's Black Lives Matter movements and marches and protests, and it ends on all of this sort of collective montage of what's happening then, and then now, of course, 4 years later, still happening. And yeah, I just think for such a tragic story, I think there was a lot of really great, wonderful things that came from Kalief Browder. He wanted to be an activist. He wanted to do these things, but the mental anguish, the psychosis that he went through at Rikers, just it was too much. But if he could see today what's happening, and what part he had in the movement that is currently growing and becoming more and more beautiful by the day, I think he would be really proud. And I think that's really what I took away from the documentary.
And there's a couple things of note I want to mention. And this is something I've not seen. The Ava DuVernay, who's a great African-American filmmaker that made Selma, which is a great movie that I anticipate us talking about in a few years.
Oh, yeah.
She made a documentary called 13th. It's on Netflix, and I've not seen it, but I know from internet research that it includes interviews with Browder, and it hits heavily on Browder's case during the course of that documentary. And his story is important, and it's one that I hope, in the wake of everything going on now with George Floyd, it gets more attention, because it's still ongoing and his family is still fighting for justice for what happened to him. And I hope that they're able to get it. Okay.
Now we're going to go to movies from 2010. Yeah. Got to segue into...
So on that note, there's at least two movies that we want to talk about today. It's going to be a transition to get from that somber topic, but we like talking about movies and TV and sports, and we want to talk about those things too. And in June 2010, two movies came out that were eventually going to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. And I definitely want us to cover all of those movies by the time this year ends. That way we can look back at the 2010 Oscars and be like, perfect, nailed it, or what the fuck happens? Why were why were these movies nominated? So the two that we're going to talk about today are Winter's Bone, directed by Deborah Granick, and Toy Story 3.
What?
Believe it or not. An all-American classic, if you ask me. Let's get into our in-depth review of Winter's Bone.
Way down in Missouri where I heard this melody, so sweet and low.
Mike Satterfield, A1 Bonds. I reckon y'all got this place about another week.
The law found Jessup's card. Somebody set fire to it. He wasn't in it.
Do you know there's people going around saying you best shut up? People you want to listen to.
Get out of the truck. Put your hands where I can see them.
Winter's Bone, not a movie I'd seen before. Have you seen it before?
No, I had heard about it. Had always wanted to watch it, and I knew it was Jennifer Lawrence's, like, you know, her
Coming out.
Yeah, coming out. So I'm a big fan of hers, man. I think she's wonderful.
She is. I mean, and she gives a tremendous performance. It's very understated. Opposed to a movie that she was nominated for Best Actress for her performance here, and she eventually wins 2 years later for Silver Linings Playbook, which is a movie I love, but that's a bigger performance. She has a lot of like showy scenes where she screams and she gets emotional, and this is like a much more understated performance.
I love Silver Linings Playbook. It's so good.
It's a great rom-dram, I guess. Like dramedy. Yeah. But that's a great movie that I'm excited to talk about in 2022.
Shit.
But Winter's Bone, I had not seen it before. Deborah Granick is someone that I know of. She's unfortunately, we talked a lot about racial injustice in the first part of this podcast, but gender injustice exists too, and a lot of what's prevented her from having a great Hollywood career has something to do with gender bias, if you ask me. But she's a tremendous director.
Mostly documentaries. She
made a lot of docs. She made
docs before and after this.
She made one feature film after Winter's Bone called Leave No Trace, which I saw in theaters, and it's available on Amazon Prime right now if you want to check it out. And this movie is available on HBO Max and HBO Go, I believe.
Go, yeah.
So both movies available to stream, and both tremendous movies about a real underseen faction of this country. And I think that the story of Winter's Bone speaks really well to the Kalief Browder case, which is about poverty and the difficulties of people growing up in poverty to break out of the cycle of not only crime, but just, the complete state of being downtrodden.
In the Ozarks.
Yes, it takes place in the Ozarks, Missouri.
Sadly, I've always referred to Missouri as misery because of its reputation, for one. And I mean, I have driven through there multiple times, and I mean, it's just flat, and you don't know what's out there, man. It's just exit after exit. And yeah, it's kind of a forgotten place. People just don't really.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been introduced to it from Netflix recently because there's a show called Ozark, which is which is about like a wealthy white family on the run that goes to live there and experiences all kinds of people that are not like them. But Winter's Bone is very much about that community. Jennifer Lawrence is a native to that community. She's 17 years old. Her father is in prison. Her mother is unstable, seemingly mentally. We don't get a ton of explanation as to what kind of state her mother is in, but she's not much of a help. And Jennifer Lawrence is trying to raise 2 children on her own and keep a house afloat. We see in the beginning that she doesn't even go to school because there's too much work to do back on the property. And she's informed by law enforcement that her father has missed his court date and he put the house up for his bail. And if he doesn't show, they're going to lose the house. So she now must find her father and hunt him down. And that is basically the plot of our story. Let's talk about how we felt about the movie. Nick, what'd you think?
I felt extremely engrossed in the story the whole time. I like slow burns like this, and that's very much what it is from the start. It's just like, I've always oftentimes wondered, because I mean, I have relatives from, North Georgia that I grew up around, and I used to always go up to the mountains, and they were kind of in these very small populated areas that, I wasn't really used to. I found the characters to be immediately engaging, and yeah, Jennifer Lawrence just like, she lights up the screen with her acting. She really brings a lot of depth to this character, Ree, who goes on a mission she's confronted by a police officer who, says what you said just now, that, their house is going to be up. They're going to have to be forced out like in the next couple of weeks. So she puts herself on this mission to go find her father, make him deal with this problem that is very much his problem that he's now put onto his family. And yeah, man, I love like the noir style of it.
Yeah, very much a noir.
Yeah, it's like this slow burn mystery about, which characters play a key role in helping the father or not helping the father. What do they know? What do they don't know? I mean, the whole movie is pretty mysterious. Like, you never really find out too much or how much certain characters necessarily know. And I love Teardrop, who's played by John Hawkes. Is that right?
Yeah, John
That's
Hawkes.
his name, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because at first, his character is Teardrop is Ree's uncle in the movie, the brother of her father, and at first he seems like a pretty sleazy dude that is abusive, and the very first thing, one of the first things he says is he tells his wife to shut up, and she keeps talking, and he said, "I told you to shut up. I told you with my mouth once," something like that. It's like, damn. So what are you gonna do next? Are you gonna hit her? Jesus. But
yeah, they're not the most likable people.
Yeah, I was really engaged with her journey, and then there's some kind of like strange like country mob out there in the Ozarks that are this organized criminal
this crystal meth ring of crime, and it's grimy and dirty, and it's a bleak movie, and it's haunting in a lot of ways. At the same time, I think that like the Ree character offers this like twinge of hope in an otherwise bleak and unforgiving world that she and the other characters of these Ozarks live in. And it feels like a very honest movie. I was surprised by how twisty it wasn't. I kept expecting like twists and turns and surprises, but everything was pretty easy to track and easy to follow, and everything you thought was going on was pretty much what was going on the entire time. And it's not really about the mystery, and more so about the horror of this young girl being thrust into this level of responsibility. And the best scene in the movie, we spoil all our movies here. So the best scene in the movie, in my opinion, comes at the end when, in order to prove that her father has been murdered, he's dead, which is why he didn't show up for his court date, and that's what everyone kind of assumes the entire time.
Yeah, I feel like you figure that out fairly.
You figure that
quickly.
out soon.
Yeah.
In order to keep the house, they have to basically prove that he's dead, and she doesn't know how to do that. And these women that work for the crime boss take her out into the middle of a lake in the Ozarks, and they force her to grab on under the water and drag up her dad's corpse and saw his hands off.
Damn, that was your favorite scene? Oof.
When I say my favorite scene, I was just gripped by the sequence. I thought it was so tense and really kind of captured the mood of the movie, which is to just put you in it and be unforgiving in that, in like the disgusting environment that this girl is forced to make her way in. Kind of in the vein of Mother, which we talked about a couple of months ago, where I was very engrossed by it. I can't say I enjoyed the process of watching it because it's so grim and bleak, but it was definitely a very well made film.
Yeah, I have a total more low key scene that I love the most in the movie, and so there's like a storyline throughout where she's thought about going to the army, and because she clearly wants to get out of there. Like I think that's her ultimate goal in her head. She's like, okay, I'm gonna deal with this for a little while. I'm gonna help my brother and my little sister, grow up, and then I'm getting the hell out. But before she can, she has to tie up all these loose ends and the problems that her father created. And there's a scene where she goes to an army recruiter, and she's just sitting there waiting, and he calls her up, and she's like, okay, yeah, I really want to join the army. How soon can we make this thing happen? How soon? They'll give you $40,000 like right off the bat if you join. How soon will I get the money? And I think the army recruiter, that guy who's playing that actor, man, I thought he was so good. And I thought he gave her such great advice. He was like asking her all the right questions, and he says, why do you want to join the army? It's more than just, wanting to get out, right? I mean, you want to join for other reasons. And she pretty much says like, no, I just need to get the hell out of here. And then, she asked how quickly she'd get the 40,000. And he's like, well, again, like, it's not just about the money, is it? Like, you really wanted to join the army? And she's like, oh no, it's pretty much just about the money. So he's like, well, that doesn't really hit I can't remember what he says. Like, it's weeks or months before. I think, yeah, it was like something like 8 months before they would even see that money. And then she also, because she's, again, a young teenager, she thinks that she could possibly bring her young brother and sister with her. And he's like, well, no, that's not necessarily
like not right away.
Because, well, what would they do when you have to go out and serve? And so all these things, because she's so naive. I just thought that was a really beautiful moment. And I thought he gave her some really good advice to, like, go do your thing still for a little while, then come back, and then we can talk. Because, again, she also needed parental consent, which she could not get. It's just, it's a heartbreaking. I think it's another situation too where, young kids and teenagers are put into scenarios like this in real life, and we don't hear about them. We don't know about them because they're in a part of the country or the world that is just, you can say forgotten, you can say mistreated, not given fair rights or proper funding or the right education. They're literally just forgotten communities. And again, coming back to, just our government in general. I'm not talking about any administration. It's just been going on for decades. Right. And it's lost communities that are sadly forgotten and need help, where they're not given any, and they have to go through situations like this. And it's just it's tragic, man. And the movie, I think, really conveys that in a really unique way. And I think I was talking to a buddy about this movie a few days ago, and he was telling me about how, like, she has all these great documentaries before and after. And he said this really cool thing on how her documentary style played so well into a theatrical sense for the movie, where as far as the narration goes, her experience with documentaries gave this movie a boost, because you can see that in the storytelling and the acting and how it was directed and shot. And I think there's a lot of aspects there that have that documentary type characteristic that you see in true stories.
It's a big part of her style, and you see it too in her next movie. Yeah.
I need to see the other one you're talking about. I've never watched that.
Leave No Trace. It has a scene very similar. Her Deborah Granick and her writing partner, whose name is Anne Rossellini, they wrote both Winter's Bone and Leave No Trace, and it's a very similar style. The dialogue is very true to the dialect that they're trying to display. I felt like these characters spoke in a way that was very authentic to the region and to the area in which they're trying to portray and perform. She's very good with low-key dialogue sequences like the one you're describing, in which Jennifer Lawrence and the army recruiter are going over the pros and cons of her deployment. And there's a similar scene in Leave No Trace that's between the main character of that movie and a psychiatrist that I thought played quite similarly. But yeah, there's a quote about this movie. Let me make sure I credit it correctly. This was a review that I read after I watched the movie from David Edelstein in New York Magazine that said, "For all the horror, it's the drive toward life, not the decay, that lingers in the mind." And I think that really summed up the kind of story that this is, because as horrific as it was, there was something lingering about that, the character's constant drive to push for resolve, to do whatever it would take to create a better life for herself and her siblings that she's taking care of. And there was something hopeful with that through so much, like at any point she could have given up, pieced out, left the kids to go to foster care or whatever, and just tried to get out and make a better life for herself. But she doesn't. She pushes forward because it's the drive toward life, despite the horror and the decay. And I thought that was a powerful quote to sum up what makes this movie pretty special.
Yeah. That's great, man. It's funny, I was going through IMDb, and sometimes I like to read the reviews because I think they're funny a lot of times. Yeah. And I came across this one person who claimed that she lived this life. Like she was raised in the Ozarks from the mid 60s to the early 2000s. So she talks about how in the Missouri Ozarks, it's the part of the U.S. that loves Sarah Palin, Rush Limbaugh, who's from there, by the way, and voted for G.W. Bush twice. And she's really she talks about how true to life this movie really was. And another thing I found interesting was the history of the laws there and the drugs, because methamphetamine really took over and the Ozarks, but before that, you had, moonshine, obviously.
Right.
And then there was marijuana became like the big cash crop after that. But then all these anti-marijuana laws poured in with tons of money going to like local law enforcement, and new laws confiscating lands forced the richer growers indoors. So it was in the mid-90s where you started to see like the meth really take hold, and it kind of took over all the remaining like marijuana farmers and moonshiners, and the counties that began to get into meth dealing. The sheriffs got involved, man, like the police, like they were involved with it. So that's why you had these like criminal organizations in these Ozark counties. Yeah, man. I mean, this person saw the evil meth really take over. She goes on to talk about how like clannish people are and hostile outsiders and profoundly ignorant, primitive in their opinions of society and politics. Those traits are nothing new.
You know what, though, on that note, I think it's interesting to hear that take about the people of the particular community this movie's based in.
Yeah, this is from a random, her name is Hillbilly Lauren.
But, despite that, I never felt like this movie was passing judgment at all on its characters. Like, you could tell that these people are not like upstanding citizens by any means. They're involved in some crime rings, and they're kind of a bit gross looking on the exterior. But the movie, and I think a lot of it has to do with Granick's direction, the movie doesn't lose their humanity. It's still very much aware that they're people.
Absolutely.
And even someone like Teardrop, who's a piece of shit, he still is given a lot of humanity. And you can tell how much he cares and how much he wants better for himself, but he's just kind of accepted at this point that he's going to have to live a certain way to get by. So I think that's interesting to hear her talk about those types of people. I never get that vibe from the movie that it's passing that sort of judgment onto the residents of the community.
No, and I think it leaves it open for the viewer to have their own judgment. I mean, right. I think that's part of the reason of the movie, right? It's like, well, you can judge these people how you want, but again, they are put in this situation, in this poverty, living in these conditions that they don't know any other way, and they're
surviving.
They live, man.
Yeah. I think it's a movie that the more you talk about, I think the more favorably I look back on it, because it is really a movie about survival. And Jennifer Lawrence's, her whole mission is survival. It's pushing towards resolve. And
also name the actors in this movie. Jennifer Lawrence.
Outside of Jennifer Lawrence and John Hawkes, I didn't know any going in.
Dude, who are these people? They're a bunch of just like no names. It's amazing. I think. I mean, I imagine a lot of them are friends of Deborah, maybe, or like acquaintances or people that she knows that are familiar with the area, maybe, because they were so good. They're so good at acting throughout it, like so convincing. I thought every character that played roles outside of Ree and Teardrop were just spot on, man. The acting was so good, and that gave this movie just another boost of. I guess that dude Garrett Dillahunt, I've seen him before. Sheriff Baskin.
That's true. I do recognize that face.
But still, man.
But yeah, I think we're both high on the movie. I highly recommend Leave No Trace, because as good as I thought Winter's Bone was, I think Leave No Trace is even better. I think that movie strikes a stronger emotional chord that, it pays off in a way at the end that left me quite emotional. And I think, like, Winter's Bone is a colder film. Leave No Trace has a bit of warmth, so it just kind of depends on what you're going for. But both incredibly impressive, and I hope that Deborah Granick makes more movies because I'm a fan of everything I've seen.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Let's have another movie, Deborah. Number 3.
Let's go. Let's go.
You have plenty of great documentaries,
but 8 years, but for the last time.
Time for another feature. Someone give her one.
So yeah, we're big fans of Winter's Bone. It got just review its accolades. This film won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance Film Festival in 2010, deemed Best Dramatic Film from the jury. It had 4 Oscar nominations. It did not win Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Lead Actress for Jennifer Lawrence, and Best Supporting Actor for John Hawkes. And I think based on our conversations, we agree with all of those and find them worthy of the merit.
Yep.
All right, let's transition. I'm excited for this. Let's talk about Toy Story 3.
Andy's going to college
on June 18th.
We all knew this day was coming.
Come on, let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
From Disney Pixar.
Welcome to Sunnyside.
In 3D. It's the biggest Toy Story ever.
Yes. You got a play date with destiny.
Folks, if you want to step right this way. Love your leg warmers.
Nice ass cut.
Toy Story 3, rated G, in Disney Digital 3D and IMAX 3D.
Yeah, let's talk about something lighthearted and fun and cute.
Toy Story 3. So I talked about Toy Story 3 briefly in our first episode when I was going over my personal 5 favorite movies of 2010. I am, in large part because of the age that I am. I was 3 years old when the first Toy Story came into theaters. I had a Buzz and Woody in my bedroom. I had all the toys, from whether it be from Toys R Us or the McDonald's, Burger King, whatever. I had all of it. I had a Toy Story board game. I was in the pocket for Toy Story 1 and 2 growing up were some of my favorite movies. I had them both on VHS, and I watched them religiously. And you know, your history with Toy Story might be different because you're 9 years older than me. But
I was a huge fan of Toy Story, the first one. And then, because I think the first one was 95. So yeah, I mean, I was 11 years old, and then the second one came out in 99. So yeah, man, I was a huge fan. And then I had a Buzz Lightyear, and he was my favorite, but I didn't hold on to it too long once I was in high school, so you probably had more time with it, whereas I just I liked the first one, and then by the time the second one came out, I was in high school, so I don't think it was as relevant to me.
Right. So like on a timing perspective, this third one comes out when I'm 17, and I myself am about to leave for college. And the crux of this movie, what I've always admired about Toy Story and why it's as a franchise, I might go as far to say it's my very favorite, top to bottom, all 4 movies that exist in it now. I admire like more than words can describe. I think that they've done such a great job of capturing adolescence and capturing existential topics about existence in a way that most children couldn't even process when they watch them for the first time. But it wrestles with this idea in the second Toy Story about, you know, there are these toys that live to serve, and they live to be played with by an owner, and that's what makes their existence meaningful. And what happens when that time is up? What happens when the kid grows up, doesn't need toys anymore, and goes off to their own life? And the second movie introduces this idea. And it's a bleak existence. It is, like, from an existential perspective, it is quite frightening, the fate that these toys would find themselves in if they were forgotten about by their owners. And it's kind of a dark thing for a child to think about. And the second movie introduces that idea, and the third movie is this idea. The third movie is all about, in my opinion, the third movie is about death. And it's about reconciling with the threat of death and the quote unquote afterlife, which is
it's also,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also about just a kid growing up and going to college. I had this really great, I don't know if I thought about this, because this was only the second time I ever watched it. Loved it the first time. It was everything I would want in a Toy Story movie. But watching it this time, I was like, man, what if Woody had just gone to college with Andy? I would love to see that movie. Like, Woody goes to college, like that alternate timeline version where, like, the toys go to the attic and Woody goes to college with Andy, and he sees Andy just, like, drunken parties and
doing college stuff.
Different people he dates. And I mean, yeah, Toy Story 3, Woody goes to college. I think that would have been amazing.
It would have at least been like a fun little like short film. I think the reality of that is that it's, you know, I certainly didn't bring toys to college. And that's, like, I think this Andy character is depicted in a way that, you know, his toys are very important to him. They clearly had a special place in his upbringing. I can't say that you know, from my memory of childhood, I never had special relationships with toys. Like, there was no toy that I, you know, carried around religiously. I you know, nothing specifically that I really clung to.
Yeah, I had a lot of toys. I don't know. I went through phases. Like, I had Darkwing Duck and Ninja Turtles, and there was a Toy Story thing. The Power Rangers were, like, one of the last few things I grasped onto before I got
Power
older.
Rangers, yeah.
Yeah, I loved all those toys. But Alien versus Predator. Like, I was into all that stuff. You know, and I grew up with a pretty colorful movie history with my older brothers and my dad. So
yeah, so I think, like, on that note, when I watched the conclusion of this movie and Andy ultimately passes his toys down to a new kid, and the toys are given a second life. They're given rebirth into the possession of a new owner that's going to, you know, basically give them an opportunity to do it all over again and grow up with a child and watch them develop. I sat in the seat and blubbered like a buffoon, with, like, tears streaming down my eyes, not because I had some sort of nostalgic memory for a toy or anything, but it's what the toys represent. The toys in that movie represent letting go of adolescence. And I think it's a really powerful message for children to see that, you know, cherish your adolescence because it's fleeting, and eventually what's important to you now won't always be important to you. So value it while you can. And I have nothing but admiration for these movies for giving that to children. And as we're about to become parents, I can tell you that if my daughter doesn't get into these movies with me, we're going to have some problems.
I feel like that's impossible. You can't. I don't know what kind of shitty human being you have to be to not enjoy these movies. It's something I'm just realizing now too. I didn't know Jim Varney, like Ernest, was Slinky the dog.
Slinky Dog, yeah.
Because he died in 2000.
He's Slinky Dog in the first Toy Story, but I think they replace him with
the dude from the Adam Sandler movies.
Yeah, I figured his name, but he sounds like Jim Varney does a Jim Varney impression.
He does, yeah. I had no idea until just right now, because I'm looking at I just went to the cast
list
of Toy Story 2, because one thing I found that's been trending since the sequel is that like they keep adding on like another big name, right? So obviously in the second one it was Joan Cusack. In the third one it was Michael Keaton, who plays the Ken doll. And then of course the fourth one that came out recently was Keanu Reeves. I'm not even sure.
Boom.
I'm not even sure I knew Michael Keaton was the Ken doll until I watched it for the second time.
Oh yeah, he's hilarious. It's a great performance.
I just liked the Ken doll performance. Yeah, I don't think I ever looked at who
Sunnyside would be cool and groovy if we all got along.
Yeah.
He's great.
But yeah, the casts of these movies, man. I mean, they're so good and they're so perfect. Like the voices. I liked the third one particularly for the daycare aspect of it.
The daycare setting.
And I just think it's hilarious when it all just goes to hell. It's just like it's like their own Rikers Island. Really.
It is.
It's like these toys just like they get put in this place
with toddlers
where they have no reason being, and they just get manhandled and bullied and thrown around and beat up, and there's no order, and it's just it's hell for them, and yeah, they have to figure out a way out. And I thought, these movies are always finding ways to just relate more to adults than children, really. And yeah, I mean, the dialogue is always spot on, sharp, funny. Yeah, I already said the voices are perfect. The just the narration, man, the editing, the story is just like, it's always so tight and just very well told, and the message is always so good.
It's I think like on its like as a base like Prison Break movie, which is a lot of what this movie is.
Yeah, it is kind of a Prison Break, isn't it?
It's a Prison Break movie. It's like Escape from Alcatraz.
Shit, dude, there's even. Sorry, I meant to bring this up. I'm glad you said that, because there's a Cool Hand Luke part. Have you ever seen Cool Hand Luke?
I've not, but I think I know what you're talking about.
It's one of my all-time favorite movies. But yeah, there's a moment where Buzz is explaining, once he's been like reset, saying how like if whoever doesn't comply with this or that, you get a night in the box.
You go in the box. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a line from Cool Hand Luke, where it's Cool Hand Luke eventually interrupts a night in the box. Yeah, we get it.
Speaking of like references to classic movies, part of the reason that I like, I talk about this movie as being largely about death and the process of like resurrection is because these movies do have a lot of biblical influence. And I think thematically, it's not necessarily a secret that the child, the owner in the Toy Story universe, serves as this godlike figure. And the toys are these, the toys live to serve the owner, however you want to word it. But there's a reference to the 10 Commandments in the latter part of this movie, where in the film The 10 Commandments, I forget the entire setup, but essentially someone says to Moses, as things look bleak and things look like it's about to end for them in their journey, one of the doubters of the preachings of the scripture, what have you, says, "Where's your God now?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's a famous quote from that movie. And at the end of Toy Story 3, as Lotso allows the toys to plummet towards an incinerator to confront their own death and potentially be burned up, he says, "Where's your kid now, Sheriff?"
Yeah.
And it's a very pointed reference to this. And it's why I like that scene with the incinerator. It's maybe the best sequence, in my opinion, of the Toy Story movies, because it's so emotional and it's very scary. And I found it frightening watching it in theaters at 17. I can only imagine what's going through a child's mind during this scene. But they're going down towards this pit of fire, and the toys all look at each other, and it's completely wordless. There's no dialogue.
Join hands.
There's no dialogue. They just look at each other. They accept what's happening, and they accept their fate, and they join hands, and they say, if this is it, we're doing it together. And it's incredibly powerful, especially if you're someone like me that watches these movies again and again and again, and you see like the character of Woody is so neurotic, and he's always trying to like, what's the solution? What are we going to do? What do we got? And he's all over the place.
Yeah, they were out of him.
And Woody is always trying to like talk and figure out the solution. And Tom Hanks plays that character wonderfully with, that neurotic voice that only Tom Hanks could bring. And to have Woody just out of things to say. And he like looks at Buzz and Jesse. It's a powerful scene, and I can't believe it exists in a kids movie. But it's
the claw.
The claw comes and saves him, which is a great. These movies are so great at like tying up like past references. Because obviously the aliens are from the claw machine at Pizza Planet, and the claw is like this deity to them that's supposed to bring them to a better life. And this is like what ultimately saves the toys in this movie. And it comes full circle because in Toy Story 2, the aliens almost fall out of a window, and Potato Head saves them, and they say, "You saved our lives. We're eternally grateful." And then in this movie, the alien saves their lives. It's
man,
great writing.
Yeah, I found myself. I don't know when I watched the third one. It was years ago, but I sort of just nonchalantly like, oh, I haven't seen the third one yet. I'll put it on. I know I enjoyed it. I know I did, but this time around, because I watched it, I think it was 2 nights ago. This time around, I enjoyed it so much more. Like, and I think there's something to what you're saying with, the fact that we have a couple of little girls on the way. But I thought, I don't know. It really hit me harder the second time around than it had that first time. I think, I don't know. I guess I was in a place when I saw the third one. Like I guess I was that shitty person that was like, I don't care about Toy Story anymore. But you know what? When you see it again, I kind of felt like this when the fourth one came out too. Once you start watching, you're like, oh yeah, fuck, these are really good movies. And you just they have no reason to be as good as they are. And you have four.
They really don't.
And you have four, and this is very hard to do. Rarely happens in cinema. You have four incredibly wonderful, well-made movies. With one classic in the original Toy Story, and then 3 seemingly perfect sequels. So,
and what's even more impressive is that I think narratively they all just like together they serve this great overarching tale. Because I think that some franchises, like, you have like great movies within franchises, but they don't always, they're kind of unrelated sometimes. They don't necessarily connect, but I think that these as a whole tell a really great story. And I was nervous about 4 because I was like, how are you gonna add an installment that does a better job of wrapping things up than the third one did? Because I thought the third was just like a perfect little bookend on this story. And I don't know if like 4 is better at doing that, but I thought 4 definitely justified why it exists. And it was good enough to have that story told. But Toy Story 3 it had no business to be as good as it is, just like you said. But it's one of my favorite animated movies for sure. I don't know off the top of my head like what would be number one, but it's all of the Toy Stories are up there, and this one in particular is near and dear to my heart because of the timing of when it came out in my life. So yeah, I think I saw this thing like 3 times in theaters. That's how that's how like just different groups of friends that I kept going back to with, and I was like, guys, I'm telling you, it's cathartic. It's cathartic for what we're about to go through.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I only ever saw the first one in theaters, I guess, and then 2, 3, and 4 I just watched watched at home.
So yeah, Toy Story 3, love it with all my heart. I could probably talk about it forever, but we've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, man.
All right.
We're over 2 hours at this point, huh?
What do you think? You want to wrap up and we could hit on basketball next episode?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess we could start with the finals this time, maybe.
Yeah, I think we can. Well, thank you guys for listening to this pretty unique episode. We had to cover some heavier topics, but I think they were necessary, and I'm glad that we were able to find a way to, tie in the theme of what we like to go for and still talk about current events in a way that will hopefully be helpful and use our small platform that we have for a little bit of good. And I hope we were able to do that. Next month, we'll come back and hopefully get to have a little more fun. And let's hope that we have a better environment to talk from then.
Black Lives Matter.
Get it through your heads, please. We will see you guys next month. Come July, I will be a father. Nick might, if his daughter comes early, most likely in August, but things are going to get crazy. Things are going to get crazy for us in the next couple of months, so we might be recording some stuff in advance just to have it ready to go while we're on dad duty. But we will have some more good stuff the rest of the year. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next month.
Bye-bye, everybody.